The AMX 50B has to be one of the best heavy tanks, or at least previously heavy tank, within World of Tanks console, and that is because the AMX 50B has become a medium, or it became a medium quite a while ago, and as such has received some sizable kind of buffs with regards to its concealment, stuff like that. Usually Wargaming have some class-based attributes that they assign to tanks based on the class that they are, and luckily the AMX 50B has received the benefits of being a medium, because essentially it's the same tank, it's just that now it's a medium tank, so is performing better. But the key thing why I enjoy this tank is because I've played the 57 Heavy, so it's given me a lot of experience with playing these 4-shot autoloader that has 1600 total damage that you can deal in a clip, reloads in roughly 20 to 30 seconds dependent on what you're playing, what consumables you're using, the equipment that you're using, and essentially it's about 25 seconds or something from what I can remember. But either way, the thing is with the 50B is that this tank is a lot faster. It has the mobility that the T57 Heavy doesn't have within the game, and that's why the 50B is kind of the better of the two. In my opinion, having played a few games, it's just more consistent because you have just that little bit extra over the T57 Heavy. So this replay is going to showcase, of course, on Redshire, like you've been seeing, a pretty meaty game, and we managed to come away with a lot of damage, having kind of carried the game a little bit. Now, we've taken this kind of forward aggressive position, kind of, it's subject to artillery, of course, as with every player in the game at the moment, but that's a whole new topic, and we've done a video entitled just to the artillery. But the 50B is of course one of those tanks where you can sit in front of vehicles like the T95 E6 and you can pump out multiple shells. You can ruin their day, and you can definitely ruin the day of people YOLO wagoning you, which is always really, really nice. So that's kind of where I'm at with the 50B in terms of the basis for this whole review. So it's a very, very solid tank, and we'll get into the nitty gritty of the vehicle in particular, and of course what kind of players are most likely going to like this tank as we move through the replay, how you can kind of utilise it, what you should, what you probably shouldn't be doing, and of course this is no exhaustive guide to play the 50B, because I just don't think that there is such a thing as an exhaustive guide to playing one singular tank in World of Tanks, even if you are the best player in the game. Now then, the AMX 50B has to be somewhat mobile in terms of being able to get to a position where you can deal damage consistently, because I feel like a lot of players that play autoloaders, they typically don't utilise the top level of an autoloader because they aren't ever really somewhere where they can dish out damage, or if they are, they're not exposing themselves in the right sort of positions where they can get a full clip's worth of damage. And that's the difference between someone that ends up having, you know, a 3k damage game and someone that ends up having a 7 or an 8k or something like that, you know, where instead of finding yourself in a position where, you know, you're getting 1 or 2 shells off every single time you reload, it's instead somewhere where you are getting the full 1600 damage off instead of 800. And of course, the more shells you get off in the clip that successfully pen increases your DPM, and so you need to make sure that you are aware of how to kind of avoid kind of exposing yourself and only dealing 1 shot of damage, or even just firing 1 shot, because that does happen too. Now, we've pushed up a little bit too aggressive here. I probably knew that, and we'll get some TD rounds I expect coming from their base. So I'm pulling back a little bit. It's 10 against 12. I keep bashing into this chisel. I'm really sorry. It's just bad driving from me. But it's looking like the majority of our team are kind of stuck in a couple of a couple of spots on the map, of course, where we are in F4, and then the rest of them are in G1, kind of moving down that line. Now, we are in a position where we need to start getting rid of some of these tanks. Of course, the shell, not even aimed at the Griller, manages to pen, and then we go after the Jaegeru, which is lovely. First shot pens, second shot pens, and then the third shot hits as well, finishing him off. And that is the sort of clip you want within this tank. Everything hitting, everything managing to pen, and coming away with 1 kill in the end of it. So really, really nice to see. Trying to move down again, keep ramming into the chisel. Hopefully that doesn't come back to bite me on the arse later on. I apologise if you're watching this, I doubt it, but if you are the chisel player there, I'm sorry. Now, 2,700 damage, 5 minutes into a game, it's not particularly anything special. That's what, like 600 damage every minute, like that's very, very low. So we want to increase that as much as possible. We're at 3,400 at this point, and of course looking to get 1,400 assistance as well. So the key thing with the 50B over the 57 Heavy, I believe, is that it gets slightly better view range from what I can remember, and of course it gets the bonus from when you're moving to kind of avoid getting detected as easily. Now, Wargaming, I don't know if they've implemented that. I mean, that's me taking from what I understand of medium tanks, that they don't get any, you have to stay still, and that increases your concealment, so you remain undetected, whereas heavy tanks, they are always at the maximum that you can be for the tank that you're playing in. So you don't get any benefit from literally sitting in the same spot, whereas mediums do. Tank destroyers also do, and light tanks don't, because they're kind of at the minimum anyway, so they're always really, really good in terms of remaining undetected. So at this point, it's not necessarily an easy win, so we have to make sure that we're not throwing ourselves away, and this is the sort of thing you have to do in the AMX50B. It might be boring in some areas of the game, but it's a hell of a lot more fun to be in the game than it is to be sat in the garage. So don't get rushed to kind of YOLO forward. Don't get rushed to push forward when you think that it's not worth it, and essentially you can spot for your team sometimes, so just be aware that even if you aren't doing damage necessarily, you can still spot, and that's exactly what we're doing here. We managed to spot the IS-7, that's an extra 400 assistance, which we love, because that's what you should be going for in these sorts of games. Now we go for the lower plate of the Conqueror, which doesn't work, but I know there's a machine on the enemy team, so we're not going to be taking any chances. I double check what the artillery are, and of course I'm waiting for the next one to come in. There is, what, 4 tanks on this sort of side of the map, so I'm deciding, you know what, I don't want to take on all of those tanks all at once, so I relocate using the mobility, looking at about 45 kilometers an hour on average when you're moving about in the AMX50B. That's without any speed boost equipment that you could potentially take in this tank, since it can go up to about 60 kilometers an hour as it's like top speed. Of course you can maintain that if you've gone down a slope, but it's difficult to maintain it otherwise. And then we finally catch the machine out. Now what you'll notice me doing is actually aiming at the side of the tracks, and that's because you can overmatch the side of the machine by firing at the tracks. So not only would you track the opponent, but you'd also come away with damage at the same time. And a lot of people forget this. It's almost like an overmatch mechanic that you can use against the machine, and it's super good, and it's definitely worth doing if you do know the weak point. So you literally just aim at the tracks, of course aim at the side which is angled towards you, so you're looking at the track that is kind of exposing the most of the side. That's the area you want to be looking at, and then just shooting at the side armor, because the side armor of the AMX50B is what the machine gets, and the AMX50B is super weak when it comes to actually being able to bounce any rounds off of the hull, or at least the side of the hull, because the standard hull armor, like from the front, is actually really strong. So you know, that's a bonus. We are of course trying to go for the Conqueror, but I'm very aware that there are some enemy artillery that are going to be breathing down my neck, as well as a tank destroyer and a medium that is somewhere unbeknownst to us. So 5,500 damage done pretty much, with 2,750 assistance is a good game. You're looking at 8k combined there, which is definitely, if you were to go for your marks of excellence, it would be a game where you would go up quite significantly because of the combined damage that you can do. I think you only need like 4k damage combined in the AMX50B. If you did that consistently, you would be able to get your third mark. It's somewhere in that region. It might be slightly higher, it might be slightly lower, but I just know that typically that's where they're at. Now, Of course, this is a gameplay that is after the buff to the artillery health, so there's a lovely batch at 15558 on full health, which is of course 1300 hit points. Now, I make a bit of a misplay here, and I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going in for the glory. We're going to ram one of these bad boys, and then I'm going to clip one of them for the rest of the health. And instead, I did neither, and ended up actually putting myself between a rock and a hard place, otherwise known as the FE 4201 or 4202, and of course the batch at 15558. We didn't even manage to pen the shell that we actually fired, so yes, not particularly my greatest achievement there, but there is still 2 tanks left alive. It is of course the artillery and also the tank destroyer. I believe the artillery is the Object 261, the tier 10 Soviet tank destroyer, pretty much at this point. Artillery. So it's most likely a win. You know, it's probably unlikely that a Jaeger is going to be able to take us all out, but we need to be careful, because if we go in one by one, then we can definitely get taken out, because I believe the Jaeger has 1050 alpha, which is, they basically have to low roll to be able to not take us out in one shell. So we need to not YOLO in, essentially, is what I'm trying to say, as well as the fact that we could potentially get hit by the Object 261. So I'm waiting until both me, the Chisel, the tank destroyer, and also the heavy tank are kind of moving towards him before it's time to kind of really go for it. The 212A here does actually fire, so we finish him off. The Jaegeru here coming in, we track him because he's going to get a shell off into us, and I don't want to actually get taken out. We re-track him there just to ensure he is actually going to be tracked, and then we go for the actual damaging shot, as well as blocking him in so he cannot possibly turn because we're against the map border, and to do that he'd have to reverse continually, and then by that time the convoy on our team has finished him off anyway. So yeah, really nice game overall, and we come away with not a MVP because the convoy did actually come top. 7,300 damage, very well done there, but we did pick up 10,300 combined damage, which is a very good game, and I was very happy with that. Of course, a mastery badge, and coming second with 1,885 base experience, so really was enthralled with playing the 50B in that game. So let's have a look at another one, showcase a little bit more, and talk a little bit more about the gameplay aspects that you can use with autoloaders in general. Next game we have is Vineyards, and Vineyards is a map that I've really enjoyed playing over the release, since the release, and it's a fairly new map in terms of what console have actually created. In fact, it may be the newest new map, if that makes sense, because essentially all of the in quotation marks new maps that we've received are just the old maps that have been updated to the HD version and added in to the game, so they're not really new maps, whereas this map is the community map that Wargaming released, and I've actually really enjoyed playing it. It gives you so much more to play, so much more to offer, and it's actually a fairly well balanced map. There are positions for every single tank in the game, including heavies, lights, tank destroyers, artillery. You know, there's something for everyone, and no one tank is particularly like super overpowered against the other tank class, if that makes sense. So playing a light tank on this is not going to negatively impact your game. You know, you can still have a good game. Similarly, if you're playing a super heavy, you can still have a good game as well. So those are the sorts of maps that I find to be the best designs that Wargaming do. Some of the ones like where you've got a super like strict heavy tank maps, not so much. Where things I'm thinking of is like Himmelsdorf. You know, it's not very fun if you were to play in a non-turreted tank destroyer and you're ending up having to play Himmelsdorf, especially if you're in a paper one. You know, it's not very fun. So you don't get really limited by the map playing Vineyards. So, really long congested way of saying Vineyards is a good map, at least in my opinion. And so, yeah, back to the 50B. Now, 50B on this map, you can play it in two different ways. You can either be the aggressive forward AMX 50B driver, or you can play it a little bit more calm, collected, and you can kind of wait for your opponents to make some mistakes. And that's what you should be doing in autoloaders, because ultimately it's your opponent's mistakes where you can capitalize on it and come away with the full clip worth of damage. And you want to make sure that you're trying to kind of find your opponents in positions where they can easily get caught out. And you're seeing me here trying to get the Tortoise. I'm also trying to get the T62A and whatever else that is kind of going to be over here. Now we try and go for the shell on the T62, don't manage to pen, and now it's time to get into cover, or at least provide some cover between me and this tank. But considering the speed of the 50B and the fact that we've pretty much got the entire team on this flank, it's time to push. We need to make an advantage, we need to carve up some area, so then we can defend against the people that may be going in over the cap area, and of course trying to actually get some damage within this game, because we don't want to be sat at the end of the game on 800 damage, because that would be a travesty for a tank that is really easy to get damage with. And you can see here the Waffle E100, the tier 10 autoloading German tank, suffering heavily against, of course, a tank that is actually just way better in my opinion. The Waffle had its day back in the day, probably like 5 years ago, maybe longer, 6 years ago, maybe even 7 years ago. That tank was actually like very strong within the game, but no longer. It is definitely a aging tank, and it probably needs a little bit of a buff or something doing to it, because it's just not competitive. It's pretty bad, in fact, because remember, it has no armor on the turret, so every single round that goes in is going to pen you. Now then, the thing I think a lot of people enjoy about playing in the AMX 50B, and why I would recommend actually getting this tank for yourself, is that it has kind of something for everyone. If you want a aggressive player, like we said at the start of this map, you know, you can be aggressive, you can be more of a controlled manner passive player. Either way, you can have some good results playing in the 50B. There's also the fact that you can play in all sorts of, or all manners of ways with regards to how you're trying to play the tank. Do you want damage? Do you want assistance? Because both are possible. Or do you want to go for a combined approach where, you know, you can get both actual damage and assistance, but maybe not the supreme amounts of both? Now, granted, the last game was pretty good in both regards, and you can still have those games, but a lot of the time it's down to like the sort of playstyle that you're kind of interested in, and the 50B is very flexible on that, and you don't really need to have any real playstyle to make it work. I suppose you just don't want to be a super heavy tank driver thinking that the 50B has super heavy tank armor, because it doesn't. And lovely shells onto the Object 261 on the enemy team, which we are very much glad of, the 261 having a decent amount more hit points than it used to, because we can farm it. So really happy about that. Of course, having done 4,200 damage, you'd probably be wondering, how can I kind of amp it up even more? And that would be kind of right in saying, because what you need to do is kind of push forward, but you don't want to push forward too much, because remember, when you're pushing into things like waffles, it's usually not going to go very well. And we start actually penning the 279E in the side. I was very surprised that my first two didn't pen, because most of the time the side armour of that tank is absolutely useless. So yeah, I thought I got a little bit unlucky with that. But either way, we've picked up 6,500 combined damage, so once again, very happy with how it's gone. And of course, it's mainly down to the fact that we've had like 3 engagements essentially, where we've been able to use the entire clip of the AMX 50B to come out with the amount of damage that we have, and also with the speed and mobility allowing us to get forward and be the one that is spotting for our team the 1,600 assistance. And this is how you can really maximize the 50B, come away with wins, come away with results where you're just feeling very happy, positive, and that is what the 50B is all about. I really love this vehicle, and if you enjoy the 57 Heavy, if you enjoy autoloaders, then this one is almost a must to have on your account. Yeah, it's definitely brilliant. A little bit of fromage frais, if I don't say so myself, but other than that, I hope you guys did enjoy the AMX50B review and kind of analysis of some gameplay showing how the tank actually works. And if you want to see some more, the gameplay and tank review playlist has a ton of loads of different tanks within the game, including tier 10 all the way down to tier 5s, and some tier 4s probably in there, but very limited, and of course pretty much all of the new premium tanks. And talking about new premium tanks, we also have the Object 780, which was released as part of the Artillery 2.0 update that you can have a look at on the left hand side of the screen, which is the most recent video kind of stream that you can have a look at some gameplay playing loads of different tanks, but primarily the 780 and why it's probably bad. Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and I hope you join me back in the next video. Thank you for your support. Goodbye.